That was pretty pathetic. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. As we go into the markup of the Farm Bill, I'm kidding. Should be kidding, but that's where we are. Before I call the hearing, well, I'll do that officially. I called this hearing of the Senate Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry Committee. But first, I want to welcome Senator Grassley, who is always in the pursuit of justice. And
I hope what you're offering me is a point of personal privilege to go ahead of everybody else, including the chairman, so I can get to.
I think when you
I can get to the Judiciary Committee to have an important.
When you threatened the ranking member and myself that you were going to investigate me and put us under oath, I thought I'd recognize you.
Okay, thank you very much. For the benefit of why he's letting me do this is because I have go to the Judiciary Committee to chair. And then we also have immigration on the floor that I'm managing. So I appreciate this because I can't be at this hearing. So this is a question I'm going to want all the members to know I'm asking, and Chairman Giancarlo to know that I'm asking it. And then when he gets a turn to respond to this, then he can respond to it so every member of this committee can hear it. But I also hope he'll back it up and answer to writing for me. The purpose of this is to have the CFTC, which has been working with the EPA and overseeing the RINs market. The two agencies signed a memorandum of understanding March 2014. So that predates the chairman of the CFTC's involvement in it. So he doesn't have any involvement in it, but he's obviously got some responsibilities now. So to Chairman Giancarlo, my question, in March of 2016, a memorandum of understanding was signed between EPA and CFTC regarding the market for RINs. RINs stands for Renewable Identification Number and is a mechanism that we use to enforce the renewable fuel standard. The memorandum states, quote, CFTC review and analysis of the information will assist the EPA in protecting the public and providing advice to EPA on conducting possible investigations into potential fraud, market abuse, and other violations relating to the generation of trading in RINs. So my specific questions for you to answer later is, how have the CFTC and EPA worked together since signing the memorandum of understanding nearly 2 years ago? Has the CFTC ever analyzed RIN data with the intent of identifying the impact of speculators have on the markets? And this issue of speculation in the markets has come up very recently, as several senators have had disputes over what ought to happen to RINs. So I thank you for that consideration, and more importantly, I thank the chairman and ranking member for the courtesy that they just gave me. Thank you very much, Chairman Giancarlo.
We thank you, Senator Grassley. That will be submitted for the record, and I know the chairman will respond in due haste, and thank you, sir. I welcome my colleagues, especially the newest additions to the Senate Agriculture Committee, Senator Fisher from Nebraska, Senator Smith from Minnesota. For the benefit of the members, I'd like to note that Ranking Member Sapp and I are both pleased to announce that Senator Fisher will be chairing the Subcommittee on Livestock Marketing and Agriculture, and Senator Smith is the ranking member for the Subcommittee on Rural Development and Energy. We welcome you to the Ag Committee. Thank you.
Yes.
And I welcome today's witness, Chairman of the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission, Chris Giancarlo, as we examine a number of issues within the derivative market space, including key and user rules currently pending before the committee, the status of cross-border equivalency agreements, determining the proper role of regulators evolving the market of cryptocurrencies. Mr. Chairman, I speak for the whole committee when I say we have been very impressed with your leadership heading up the CFTC since January of last year. While we held a number of confirmation hearings last year for you and your fellow commissioners, it has been almost 3 years since this committee has held a true oversight hearing examining the CFTC and the markets that you regulate. This hearing is very timely, given that a lot has happened since that time. This is especially true in the derivative sector, where commodities like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have become a major topic of discussion, not only among large financial institutions on Wall Street, but among retail purchasers who are trying to determine what role, if any, cryptocurrency should play in their investment decisions. Because cryptocurrency offerings and the technologies they are built upon are skyrocketing, regulators like the CFTC are working hard to provide consumer protection, but without stifling further innovations in the market. Furthermore, the technology underlying cryptocurrencies has transformative potential. Blockchain, or distributed ledger technology, may offer the economy significant benefits as it is used to create more secure, transparent, and efficient ways for record keeping. I am pleased to see the CFTC taking such an aggressive and active role in this space. And there was the historic vote by the people of Great Britain to leave the European Union. We are now seeing how the decisions of European officials regarding cross-border financing regulations may upend carefully negotiated agreements that would otherwise provide regulatory certainty to financial stakeholders operating on an international stage. We also continue to hear from important derivative end users in the agriculture sector and beyond, eagerly awaiting resolution to important rulemakings mandated under the Dodd-Frank Act. We understand you and CFT staff are working diligently on a number of these issues, and we look forward to hearing with regard to your progress. To that end, Mr. Chairman, I understand without an additional commissioner, finalizing some of these important rules is made much more difficult. I think both the ranking member and myself would like to see Don Stump, who was reported out of the committee last year, confirmed as soon as possible. The holder of her pending nomination is unacceptable, and we will move forward on consideration on the additional vacant commissioner spot as soon as an individual is nominated. We need to move forward and get a fully functioning commission. Whether it's market participants who rely on CFTC to provide regulatory certainty or consumer financial advocates who highlight the need for robust oversight of the market, I think everyone can agree we need a full panel of commissioners at the CFTC. Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for being here today. I look forward to your testimony. I now turn to my colleague, Senator Stabenow, for her opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome again, Chairman Giancarlo. It's been good to work with you, and appreciate your being before the committee. And I also want to join the chairman in welcoming our new members, Senator Smith and Senator Fisher. Very, very pleased to have you on the committee, particularly at this important time when we're coming into our major responsibility as a committee in writing the 5-year farm bill. So thank you so much. Many people don't realize the importance of futures and swap markets to the strength and stability of our economy. I know this committee does. When a corn or soybean farmer in Saginaw County, Michigan needs protection from damaging swings in commodity market prices, they use the futures markets. When an auto manufacturer in Detroit needs protection against changes in foreign currency in order to export American-made products, they use swaps. Futures and swaps markets support our economy, helping to create American jobs and promoting economic stability. We need a strong CFTC to ensure that those markets are fair and transparent and free of fraud and abusive practices. It's been roughly 10 years since the Great Recession, when the reckless actions of a few led to the pain and suffering of many. Over 8 million jobs were lost. Countless small businesses were shuttered. Farmers and businesses across the country faced foreclosure. Many older Americans were forced to delay their hard-earned retirements, while many younger Americans were unemployed and unable to pursue their piece of the American dream. We must never allow the devastation of the Great Recession to be repeated. It's critical that we do all we can to ensure that farmers and businesses and families are protected from financial ruin through no fault of their own. Congress has entrusted the CFTC with tremendous responsibilities: protecting customers, promoting transparency and stability in our markets, monitoring for market abuses and systemic risk, and holding wrongdoers accountable, just to name a few. And since the passage of Dodd-Frank, the CFTC has worked hard to promote strong customer protections. The agency has modernized its surveillance capabilities to better identify market abuses and systemic risks, and its enforcement program has exposed wrongdoing by some of the world's largest financial institutions, while also targeting the crooks and fraudsters who push Ponzi schemes and investment scams in our own communities. But as I have said before, there's more work to be done. We must continue to make progress toward a safer financial institution and system, which is why I am concerned that the agency has not yet completed the rulemaking required for Dodd-Frank. Critical rules such as implementing speculative position limits and setting minimum capital requirements for swap dealers remain non-existent. I'm also interested to learn more about emerging market issues such as the CFTC's approach to automated trading and the tremendous growth of the cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. And finally, we must continue to advocate for the CFTC to have the resources so that you can really do your job. The CFTC's responsibilities have increased dramatically since the Great Recession, without the necessary funding to fully carry out those responsibilities. And as a result, Americans have been placed at risk, and that's not acceptable. Chairman Giancarlo, I know you share this concern. I'm committed to advocating for a fully funded CFTC, and I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this critical need. Our nation's farmers, ranchers, Main Street businesses, and consumers all depend on fair and transparent derivative markets, and they need the security and protection provided by strong CFTC oversight. Today, I look forward to hearing more about how the CFTC will continue to strengthen its efforts to safeguard our markets, minimize systemic risk, and protect consumers from fraud and abusive practices. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member, for our comments. I now turn to our witness for today's hearing, Chairman of the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the Honorable J. Christopher Giancarlo. Welcome back, Mr. Chairman. You are a familiar face to the committee. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip a lengthy introduction. The value of your extensive prior experience in the private sector and your time as chairman and the CFTC commissioner has been revealed in the way you have been leading the agency. Since taking the helm, you have done a great job advancing your vision of making CFTC a 21st century regulator. We look forward to hearing about the work you have done and your future plans. Just for the record, what was the level of funding that you requested that you think you need to do a good job?
$281.5 million.
And then what was the result with regards to the president's budget?
The president's budget has put that number for 281.5.
281.
0.5.
Yes, but not all of it is in funding. There are what we call user fees. Is that correct?
That is correct.
What is that number?
31.5 million.
31.5 million, which will be a tax on the farmers and ranchers who use your capabilities and your trust as they try to manage risk. I'm not happy with that. I think the ranking member joins me. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I just want to let you know that we will consider our budget according to our baseline, hopefully commensurate with your needs. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Roberts, Ranking Member Stabenow, and distinguished members and new members of the committee. When I appeared before this committee last summer, I stated my priorities for the CFTC: to foster open, competitive, and transparent markets, free from fraud and manipulation, in support of broad-based economic growth that respects the American taxpayer through careful management of agency resources. I pledge that, if confirmed, I would work with each of you in our common purpose of serving the American people and the agricultural producers on which we all rely. Thank you for this chance to report on our progress. I look forward to your questions on the CFTC's enforcement program, recent budget request, swap dealer de minimis, position limits, swap data reporting, Project KISS, our upcoming Ag Futures Economics Conference, and other matters. And I also look forward to discussing the complex challenges of virtual currencies, including the CFTC's response and increased staff competency, consumer education, interagency cooperation, our exercise of authority, aggressive enforcement, and heightened review of virtual currency futures. But with your permission, I'd like to use the next few minutes to talk about American agriculture. The U.S. Census Bureau estimates that there will be another 2 billion people on Earth in the next 30 years. This poses a massive challenge for the global economy and governments and societies worldwide. How will all these people be fed? How can we meet these challenges? American agriculture. Just as the U.S. has emerged as a self-sufficient producer of energy for global markets, thanks to American ingenuity and entrepreneurship, the U.S. will play a big part in feeding the globe in the decades to come, thanks to the hard work and intelligence of the American farmer and rancher. And American agriculture and energy producers will respond to the rising global demand with the support of U.S. derivative markets regulated by the CFTC and overseen by this committee. Our futures and swaps markets serve at least two critical roles in feeding and powering the world's growing population. First, they allow markets to resolve imbalances efficiently by providing reliable price benchmarks set in US dollars. Second, they reduce price volatility of the world's limited resources by removing the economic incentive to hoard physical supplies. They allow America's farmers, ranchers, and energy producers to measure and transfer the risks of production to those willing and able to take that risk, stabilizing earnings and benefiting all parties, including consumers worldwide who otherwise do not participate in derivative markets. For these reasons, American agriculture and American commodity futures markets are vital national interests. CFTC regulated markets are among the world's most robust and the most resilient. Even with extreme volatility, as we saw recently, CFTC regulated markets were able to successfully take on and manage risk, enabling valuable risk transfer to support and stabilize the broader financial market. That is why I'm grateful to you, Chairman Roberts and Ranking Member Stabenow, for your recent letter supporting the CFTC's approach to the cross-border supervision of major clearinghouses and our current discussions with regulatory counterparts in the European Union. As you know, in 2016, my predecessor, Tim Massad, painstakingly negotiated an agreement with the EU for how we supervise each other's clearinghouses. That agreement, which I supported as a minority commissioner, is built upon the principle of regulatory deference. We believe that deference supports strong cross-border markets, recognizes our commonalities, and builds upon the strengths of our respective jurisdictions. The agreement aligns with the mutual pledges of the United States and Europe in the G20 Accords to cooperate and avoid market fragmentation, regulatory arbitrage, and protectionism. And that is why we continue to seek assurances from the EU that U.S. clearinghouses will not be treated differently than they are now. American markets must continue to be regulated under U.S. law by American regulators overseen by this committee of Congress. In closing, with the proper balance of sound policy, American regulatory oversight, and supervisory deference by our overseas regulatory counterparts, U.S. commodity derivative markets will continue to safely serve the needs of America's farmers, ranchers, and energy producers, enabling them to feed and power the world, not just today, but in the generations to come. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Chairman, thank you very much for a comprehensive commentary, more especially outlining the challenge that we face in feeding not only ourselves, but a troubled and hungry world. Show me a country that
Especially
cannot save
outlining
itself,
the-
will show you chaos, and we got a lot of that. And it would be helpful if we had an aggressive and robust trade policy that anybody could figure out. And thank you for your comments. While blockchain is mostly discussed in its context as the technology underlying Bitcoin, my understanding is that potential benefits are substantial for multiple industries, from agriculture to financial services to healthcare and so on. Notably, a few weeks ago, there was news of major efficiencies shown in the sale of approximately 60,000 tons of soybeans using blockchain. As this technology and its transformative potential continues to emerge, what role, if any, should regulators play in this beginning stage?
Thank you, Senator. Blockchain, we're seeing it expanded dramatically in not only the instance you mentioned, but I know a number of other American agriculture merchants are now adopting it. We're even seeing the rail transportation system adopting blockchain techniques. The potential of this technology is truly transformative. Now, what it will take to realize it and how it will be realized and how long it will take, those are open questions. But the more I read about it, the more the impact that it can have on so many of the traditional systems that we utilize, whether in finance, whether in logistics, whether in transportation, are extraordinary. But it presents tremendous challenges for regulators. The concept behind it is the decentralization of information and the bypassing of central authorities that for centuries societies used to verify information. And if you think about it from a regulator's point of view, we ourselves rely on verifiers, whether they be exchanges or whether they be data repositories. And the traditional mode of regulation is to license those verifiers to play a role in our regulatory framework. So it presents tremendous challenges for us in our traditional ways of regulating, which brings me to the points, Chairman, it is so important for us to stay ahead of these transformations. If we fall behind, we could find a real disruptive impact on our traditional mode of regulation.
I appreciate that. I'm going to get parochial here. One of the biggest issues in the derivative space I hear about from farmers in Kansas and elsewhere, concerns of the lack of convergence. In the past, Kansas City hard red winter wheat futures contracts, while time will tell so far the change to a variable storage rate looks at least somewhat promising. What update can you provide on outreach the CFTC has done with producers and exchanges regarding this issue?
We're focused very carefully on this issue in hard red winter wheat and actually a number of other ag products. Just this week, my staff had meetings with the exchange and with a number of the National Grain and Feed Association as well to talk about this issue and understand some of the dimensions of it. I will tell you that the upcoming contract, I believe it's the March contract, is one of the most used contracts. And the information that will come out of that is one we're going to be looking at very carefully to determine whether we've got a broader problem or just an anticipated problem. But I can assure you, Chairman, we're watching this very carefully.
Just for the record, I think we have too much wheat on the ground and not enough of a demand situation with regards to our trade policy. Mr. Chairman, you touch on the issue of cross-border agreements in the letter that the distinguished ranking member and I sent you in January. I ask unanimous consent this letter be submitted for the record without objection. I understand you will be meeting next week with a number of your counterparts in Europe. Can you give us just a preview or sense of where current discussions are going on the issue of clearinghouse supervision and other equivalency agreements entered into between your agency and the European regulators?
Yes, thank you, Senator. And thank you for that letter. Knowing the resolve of our oversight for our European counterparts to know of the resolve of this committee and your support for our position is extremely helpful. The message I have been giving to them and the message I will be giving them the next one is the same one that I said in my opening statement, and that is American markets must continue to be regulated under U.S. law by American regulators overseen by this committee of Congress. That is the position I've stated from the beginning, and that will be the position I will maintain throughout the negotiations.
I truly appreciate your comments. Thank you for your responses. I appreciate your insights on all these topics. I do have additional questions for you, but in the interest of time, I will submit them for the record. I look forward to your responses. I now turn to Senator Stabenow for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you, Chairman. I wanted to follow up. The Chairman was talking about the letter we had written to you. We wrote regarding, of course, Bitcoin futures. And I'm wondering, as we look at protecting customers and market participants, what more needs to be done at this point?
Senator, it is such a fast-moving area that I think the critical thing is that we have to be learning, watching, understanding every step of this way. We had a 4-hour meeting yesterday of our Technology Advisory Committee at the CFTC, and we had some of the leading experts in this area in educating us. As you know, we've also started something at the CFTC called Lab CFTC, which is our outreach into these technological developments to understand their innovations. The first step is a thorough understanding of this emerging technology and how it works.
One of the things you mentioned in your testimony was the shortcomings in oversight at this point in time, and that there are gaps in protections for traders and investors in the markets. And so, I mean, that is worrisome. And I'm wondering how quickly something can happen. These markets are going to continue to grow, and they've got to be made safer for investors and the broader financial system. And so, I appreciate the approach you're taking, but how soon will we see something definitive happening?
Well, so as you know, in our budget request, we do request additional funds for additional examiners, and that's very, very important. I'm pleased to tell you, Senator, that in the new Bitcoin futures product, since its launch, there has not been a single margin breach, even during the heightened volatility that we saw over the last few weeks. So that product is operating in a completely lit environment, a transparent environment. We are monitoring unlike Bitcoin Cash Market, which we don't regulate, we don't have oversight authority over. We have enforcement, but not oversight. In Bitcoin futures, which we have complete regulatory oversight, we see all the transactions identified. It's not an anonymous market. It's a disclosed market. It's a thoroughly regulated market. It's a market of mostly institutional and high net worth. It's not a primarily retail market, as is the underlying market. So we're confident that the regulatory systems we put in place over decades will serve well in this new futures market. The underlying market, as I've disclosed in my written statement, is not a supervised market, and that is a policy choice that I think we're all going to have to face in the months and the years to come.
Mr. Chairman, you've talked about adequate funding. I know this is something I have talked about for a long time. I'm glad to see the movement in the budget. We have to figure that out. But and you're talking about oversight, CFTC's oversight. Could you talk in general about what you've done to strengthen the CFTC's oversight program? And you talk about needing more staff to do this new piece. How much has this been a problem in terms of providing accountability and oversight with not having the staff that's needed to be able to do that?
Thank you, Senator. I would never let our oversight capability suffer any deterioration in its effectiveness. There are other needs that perhaps we might triage against, perhaps some training, some publications. We've long had a library at the CFTC. I mean, there's areas where we can move, but when it comes to oversight, we maintain cops on the beat. One of the structural changes I made since becoming chairman was to move our surveillance branch into our enforcement branch, so that the lag between detecting wrongdoing and acting on wrongdoing is immediate and not delayed by any type of interagency delay. So I feel that our effectiveness in rooting out fraud and manipulation is as strong as it's ever been, but we do have needs elsewhere. We've suffered losses in our economics unit, our Office of Chief Economist, which we need to beef up. There are other areas, but when it comes to fraud and manipulation, we are as strong whereas recovering the waterfront without any gaps.
Thank you. And finally, you've talked about, you've announced Reg Reform 2.0.
Yes.
My question is, based on the fact that there are several critical rulemakings not yet done from Reg Reform 1.0, when will you complete the unfinished business, and will you commit to not weakening any of the safeguards that have been built in since the financial crisis?
Yes, if I can take the last one first, I can pledge to you, I do not intend to weaken the safeguards built in. I'm a supporter of the core reforms of Title VII of the Dodd-Frank Act, always have been and remain today. The two unfinished ones you mentioned in your opening remarks are de minimis and position limits. I said to you when I met with this committee last June that we would get both of those done. And in the fall, I said we would get the de minimis done in the first half of this year. I intend to put that in front. In fact, meetings are now scheduled with my fellow commissioners to present them with data through the end of 2017. So they will have the most up-to-date data, and those conversations will take place over the next several months. On position limits, I also pledged to you to move forward with that. We are moving forward with that. We will have something to present to the commissioners, I think, by the beginning of the second half of this year. The staff is working on it now. Now, in position limits, as you know, that's a complicated rulemaking. But I think we can get this done, but I do think it is something that this does require a full commission. I think that for position limits to be a lasting rulemaking, it should be considered by a commission of 5 as intended. So I hope we won't stop working on something, but I hope that a final rule can be voted on by 5 commissioners, not by 3.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for being here. We do appreciate all of your hard work, your insight today as we really delve into some important issues. One thing I'd like to say before I get into my question is that I very much oppose the question of user fees. I opposed it in 2016. I think that if we go down that path, then we'd likely reduce liquidity, have increased volatility, and less efficient use of our futures markets. I know that the issues of funding and so that you can do what we ask you to do is so important. So as a member of the Appropriations Committee, I think I can speak for the Appropriations. We're working hard now as we get into trying to finish out fiscal year 2018 and then also starting 2019 to try and address that. We've talked a lot about in the past cybersecurity. I'd like for you to comment on that. It seems like our agencies now, because we can do it, we can gather all of this information, but with that comes the responsibility. As we essentially centralize it, comes the responsibility of protecting it. Can you tell us what you're doing in that regard?
Absolutely, Senator. Thank you for that question. And I'm delighted you asked me this because it's one that I've been focused on since I've joined the commission. I spoke in 2015. I was honored to be asked to go to Harvard Law School and speak on 21st century challenges. And I said the number one challenge to America's, in fact, global financial markets is cyber. And I remained as convinced of that in 2018 as I was in 2015. Since becoming chairman of the agency, I've done a number of things. I now meet once a month in a scheduled meeting with our chief cyber officer. And at that meeting, he presents me with the full rundown of everything we've seen on the cyber front over the past month. And I can't disclose all of that to you, but I have previously said that we receive close to 10,000 cyber attack attempts per month. So to give you an idea of the relentless threat that we face, and I know a number of the key institutions that we oversee face even higher numbers, such as our exchanges and others. So this threat is serious. I'm satisfied from those meetings that as an agency, we are compliant with the key federal regulations under FISMA, the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, the National Institute of Standards of Technology, NIST standards, and annual OIG audits. But we've done more than that. One of the things we've started at the commission that's never been done before, we now do full agency-wide cyber drills. A few weeks ago, we just did our second drill under my chairmanship, full agency-wide, all 4 offices, where we did a simulated attack on the infrastructure that we oversee to see how we react to that. Because there's an old adage in the military service that I think the chairman may be familiar with, and that is you fight as you drill. And so I've told the staff we're going to drill repeatedly so we'll know how to fight when the cyber attack comes. We are also asking the entities that we regulate to have similar protocols in place as well. Now, one of the areas that we are asking for additional funding for is for our ability to examine the cyber readiness of the entities that we oversee, the exchanges and otherwise. We can use more resources to examine their cyber preparedness. Very
good. I appreciate you coming out so strongly in regard to the EU Commission and things, the agreements that we worked in the past protecting that. Can you give us an example of what would happen if those were weakened significantly?
Yes, we're very concerned that the EU may have in mind the ability and the right to do unscheduled, independent examinations of our clearinghouses to show up on their doorstep and to go in and conduct exams, to conduct test procedures, to require European standards and European practice on how our clearinghouses operate. I know of no other area where an overseas regulator can come into a U.S. regulated environment and conduct their own independent, or even if they propose to do it in conjunction with us, that's not our legal structure. We are a sovereign nation. We are an independent agency. We report to this committee and a committee in the House, but we don't report to overseas regulators. And the dimensions of what could come out of this proposed European legislation, I think, are quite breathtaking. Now, what we're told is that we're maybe getting ahead of ourselves, that we need to wait and see what this all means. Well, I've never been one to much wait. I think that we need to make clear to Europe right now that we've been regulating our clearinghouses for decades. We've gotten it right. None of them failed during the financial crisis. I think we can always improve, but quite frankly, to be told that we'll have to jointly work with an overseas regulator is something that's unprecedented.
Well, thank you. And again, I think we have complete agreement on that issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Smith.
Thank you very much, Chair Roberts and Ranking Member Stabenow. I'd like to just start by telling you how excited I am to serve on this committee and represent Minnesota farmers and also Minnesota Forest Products organizations with my colleague, Senator Klobuchar. And I'm really honored to be the ranking member on the Rural Development and Energy Subcommittee. So I look forward to working with Senator Ernst on those rural priorities and to work hard for Minnesota priorities on the Farm Bill. And I'm excited also really respect the spirit of bipartisanship that has been a hallmark of this committee, and I look forward to working with all of you. So thanks very much. And Chairman Giancarlo, I wanted to talk with you a little bit about the swaps market. So like many Americans, Minnesotans certainly suffered deep losses as a result of the 2008 financial crisis, lost, as Senator Stabenow said, lost their homes, lost their jobs, lost their savings. And one of the contributing factors, of course, was this largely unregulated swaps market. So I think it's so important that we make sure that there is a strong swaps regulator here. I'm sure we share that value. So can you just discuss with us a little bit about how the changes that you are working on to existing swaps rules won't increase the risk of another financial crisis?
Thank you for that question. And may I just simply say that, as Senator Klobuchar knows, I've had some very good education in Minnesota agriculture over the last few years. I got to visit the Blue Diamond Dairy Farm just east of Sauk Center in 2016, and I was in Bloomington just in December with the Minnesota Cattlemen's Association. And when you meet with folks like that are really at the should I say the grassroots level of agriculture, you understand how important it is that we back at the agency get these rules right so that they do not have to experience what they experienced once again. You know, I'm rather proud of the CFTC. When I look around at our fellow derivative market regulators, we are really the only one, and I say this knowing that our European colleagues may be listening, we are the only one that have our full suite of swaps regulations in place. And the regulations follow Title VII of Dodd-Frank. This agency embraced its role to implement those reforms, and those reforms are in place today, and they are working in place. Now, that doesn't mean that every element of them works as well as it should or is intended, which is why the process of regulation is not a one and done. It's a constant one to measure, to make sure that as markets change, and markets are very organic in their nature, they evolve and they change, and we need to make sure that our rules evolve and change to meet new changes in the marketplace.
Thank you. So how do you sort of assess, as you're making these sort of adjustments, tweaking to the rules, how do you assess kind of what impact that might have on the potential for a future financial crisis?
Well, we stay in constant contact with the market. One of the things that we have done since I've become chairman is created a new branch within our Division of Market Oversight called Market Intelligence. And the goal of this branch is to try to understand, there's a great hockey player named Wayne Gretzky who said he was successful not because he skated to where the puck was, but because where the puck was going. And the goal of Market Intelligence branch is to see where the puck is going in terms of market evolution, and to try to make sure that our rules and regulations stay adequate for those changes in the market.
Thank you. As a Minnesotan, I'm well familiar with the Wayne Gretzky analogy, so I appreciate that very much. Let me just, in the minute I have left, touch briefly on this question of budgets and user fees, and how we might, how we make sure that you have the resources that you need to do the work that you do. If we don't go to a user fee model on this committee, and I understand that we haven't, there's no decisions made about that. Could you just sort of explain what impact that might have on your budgets, and how you would what you would do?
Yeah. I know that the number we put forward, 281.5, which is the same number we put last year, is the right number. And that is because I approached it the way I did in business of building a budget. I didn't take the number from the prior year and add a percentage to it and say that's our new budget number. I said, I want to start from zero. This is my first time as a chairman. I made every division present to me what their mission was, what their needs were, what their capabilities were, and where they were lacking capabilities. And we built the number up from zero. It's called zero-based budgeting. And the number we need, I know it, is 281.5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Smith. Again, just for the record, I view user fees as a tax on the farmers, ranchers, and growers, and all the people that depend upon you to make sure that their risk management strategy is protected. Senator Klobuchar.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We will forgive you, Senator Smith and I, for using an example of a hockey player that wasn't from the Wild or the old North Stars, but that's okay. We do want to thank you for visiting our state, both in Stearns County and then the recent visit with our cattlemen. We really appreciate that. And one of the things you and I have talked about in the past is how commercial end users who base their derivative trades in the actual physical products that they produce or use is one group. And then you have financial institutions who base their derivative trades on fluctuations in prices, and you all know this, or the index, different types of companies. And just based on your visits to Minnesota and other places around the country, how's that helped inform you as you look at those different types of situations?
I'm a firm believer that in so many walks of life, that diversity adds value to the marketplace. And I think that's especially true in financial markets. I think the broader range of market participants, from big to small, from some call naturals, all the way to speculators, not excessive speculators, but speculators, add depth and value to a market. And when I meet with end users agricultural and energy producers and understand their concerns, it's critically important that we make sure that they continue to be comfortable operating these markets alongside some of these commercial, some of these proprietary traders as well. And what we need to do with the agency is always try to make sure there's an environment where all can participate. That
Okay.
provides the greatest depth.
Thank you very much. I know that Chairman Grassley, oh, no, former Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Grassley, excuse me, ask you about the issue of RIN data. And as you know, the RFS is critically important, and I've been working on that for a long time. The CFTC's willingness to work with the EPA to combat fraud in the creation and sales of RINs is important as we work to sustain confidence in the market-based regulatory system. Based on your experience, do you believe that current information in trading data in RINs markets would increase transparency?
What I can tell you, Senators, we were asked by EPA to look at certain physical market data, which we did. We do oversee, as a regulator, trading in the RINs futures contract. Unfortunately, there's virtually no trading in that contract. I mean, I think one or two trades, that's how little activity is there. And we monitor that, but there's virtually no activity. In the underlying market, we are not the regulator of the underlying market, but at the request of EPA, we did review data and we gave them results. Based upon the data, we were not able to find any misbehavior in the market, but the data was both limited and not of sufficient quality. And we're a data-driven agency, and analyzing bad data, you don't necessarily get good results, unfortunately. And we had a conversation about that. I recently spoke with Ag Secretary Perdue about this market and shared these thoughts with him. And we've agreed that we are going to put our best economists on taking a look at this, and they are going to be meeting in the next few weeks. So there's opportunities for engagement here, and we will have that engagement, and we'll see what comes of that.
Okay, thank you. Last, as you know from your visit, the livelihood of ranchers in Minnesota depends on the prices that they receive for their cattle, the cost to raise them. Can you talk about how the CFTC documents and transaction data within cattle markets and cattle future markets help to determine what is irregular, what's regular with the fluctuations? And during the CFTC's collaboration with GAO, were there any initial findings about the cattle markets that you can share with our committee today?
So, cattle has been the cattle contract has been a concern of mine for some time. It became quite clear over the last few years that there were some convergence issues in that contract and other problems. We communicated with the CME, which operates that contract, our concerns, and to their credit, took a number of steps to restructure that contract and improve that contract. Now, we continue to watch it to see how these improvements, as of last year, it looked like they were addressing a number of concerns of the cattlemen, but it was one of the very subjects I spoke to the Minnesota cattlemen about when I was up there. How is it working? Are these changes having an impact? And there still may be a number of issues there. What I would say broadly is one of the things I've learned as chairman is that it's vitally important for the agency to keep an eye on how contracts, especially in the ag market, are working, and to let those that operate the contracts at the exchanges know their responsibilities to keep these contracts fresh, updated. Sometimes contracts aren't even updated for a long period of time, many, many years. And that needs to be done frequently. These contracts need to be looked at because they need to serve our ag users.
Thank you very much.
Well, Coop, it's 10:17, maybe 16. It's not high noon yet. But did you get all the critters rounded up? You're recognized, sir.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you and Senator Stabenow having the hearing today, and I want to thank Chairman Giancarlo for appearing before the committee. I appreciate the CFTC's efforts to bring transparency and integrity to cryptocurrencies. I understand that the CFTC does not have the authority to conduct regulatory oversight on virtual currency platforms, but that it is working with a number of agencies on multi-regulatory approach for cryptocurrency oversight. What are your thoughts on the current multi-agency approach, and what is the most effective way, would you say, to regulate cryptocurrency?
Thank you, Senator. It's tremendously challenging. Bitcoin and other virtual currencies is a legally traded product, and yet there is no federal agency with direct regulatory oversight over those spot markets. And what I mean by that is the ability to set standards, to determine capital adequacy, best practices, how they deal with customers, what are their cyber protections, what are their security protections. There is no federal agency that sets those standards. We do not have the jurisdiction to do it, as we don't in any spot cash market. What we do have is enforcement authority for fraud and manipulation to the extent we're able to see it. But as I explained to Senator Klobuchar, we're a data-driven agency, so having that data or the lack of that data is very important. With our new Bitcoin futures products, we entered into unprecedented arrangements with those two exchanges offering those products to gather data from the 5 Bitcoin spot markets so that we can now start analyzing. So for the first time as a federal agency, we can see data, at least in a limited number of cases, in spot markets, so we can police them for fraud manipulation.
Do you think you need to have more regulatory authority and resources to bring greater transparency and integrity to those platforms?
I think if it is the policy choice that those platforms need direct supervision, then some agency will need the resources to do it. We are not an agency that traditionally supervises spot platforms. So it would be more than a question of resource. It would be a change of our mission, of our mandate, of our approach. So it would be a very significant change for us across the board were we to take that on. Chairman Clayton and I, though, our first step is to just make sure that policymakers are aware that this is an unregulated environment. It's a legal environment, but it's an unregulated environment.
Let me shift gears real quickly. In March 2016, CFTC and EPA signed an MOU related to RIN markets. The purpose of the MOU was in part to permit sharing of confidential information, business information, I should say, on the RIN market so that the CFTC could advise EPA on, and I quote, techniques that could be employed to minimize fraud, market abuses, or other violations, and to conduct appropriate oversight in RIN and renewable fuel markets. Have you given EPA any advice? And if so, what was it?
Our advice is that the data that they're collecting is, there's an old saying in technology and software, garbage in, garbage out. If the data is not terribly good, it's awfully hard to make head or tail of it. And one of the problems we had in analyzing the data was that it wasn't really adequate to tell us what they were hoping that we could tell them is the presence of manipulation.
So more and better data would help.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, we hope that you're a part of providing advice on that subject. Obviously, as you know, there's a lot of controversy and a lot of discussion around it. Mr. Chairman, thank you, sir.
Appreciate it, Senator. See, we have Senator Brown.
Mr. Chairman, I share the concern of a number of my colleagues. I know the chairman has mentioned this. Senator Smith mentioned it about your budget, about the fees. I particularly share the concern. I know you say you have enough, but I also know this agency has been shorted in too many cases. And as you testified in the banking committee last week, Mr. Chairman, about the demands created by the emergency of by the emergence of virtual currencies, Bitcoin and related derivatives, that I'm even more concerned about your budget. So I hope that you will kind of relook at this, reflecting the bipartisan concern here about your ability to do some of the things that we think you need to do. Just a statement, you don't need to respond to that. I know that CFTC has recently announced some high-profile enforcement cases on market manipulation and virtual currencies. I'm concerned, though, that the overall trend shows a decline in enforcement actions and penalties. Fiscal year 2017 showed a significant decline from prior year levels. Democrats, especially on banking and on this committee, are concerned that some of the new Trump regulators are a bit too close to the industry, shall we say. So how explain in that context why we should reassure us why the downward trend in the enforcement data is not a bad thing. It seems like a deliberate pullback in enforcement.
So Senator, as you can understand, I became chairman in the middle of fiscal year 2017. That year really reflects the enforcement priorities of my predecessor, not me, because enforcement actions take time to generate. It also, that Wall Street Journal article that looked at that, compared years where the CFTC had some extraordinarily large awards against a few large banks in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So what I think on those 2 points, a better trajectory is to look at just recent activities. Just in the last month alone, we have brought $100 million worth of settlements against Wall Street banks just in January alone. I think you'll see going forward an enforcement agenda that reflects more of my priorities as opposed to perhaps my predecessor's priorities. In terms of, and I think,
Have you some of those penalties against repeat offenders?
in the repeat offenders, meaning banks that have been fined
Yes.
a penalty, yes.
If I'm concerned about, I mean, you don't represent SEC. I understand that. I know that your agency, and I think you've continued this. When you move on an action, you send a press release, which is helpful, I think, in sending that message. SEC doesn't always do that. So, do you believe that publicizing those major actions tends to have a dampening effect on cheaters, on people going too far? Is that sort of your purpose? And
Absolutely, Senator. Absolutely, Senator Brown. And you know, one of the criticisms that's been aired is the lack of criminal activity. Now, we don't have criminal enforcement activity, but under my watch, we've just completed a very successful joint action with the Department of Justice and the FBI, in which we've brought criminal charges against a number of those at some of these Wall Street banks that were manipulating markets over the last few weeks. So I do believe that not only do press releases, but also the actions that an agency is willing to work across the aisle with other agencies to not only bring civil charges, but also criminal charges, sends a message that we're serious about enforcing.
Would it help you if SEC is visibly troubled, if SEC would send out those same kinds of releases you do to send the message you send that you think is important to send? Would it be helpful if they would also do that?
I have to say, Senator, I'm not that familiar with their practice to form a judgment as to its adequacy. I know that we work hard to make sure that our press releases send out the message that we're trying to send, that we're serious about enforcement.
I guess I would close, Mr. Chairman, by asking that, I mean, I know that you and the SEC, you sat together in committee the other day. I know that you seem to have a warm relationship. I would hope that I know that you run this agency, he runs that agency, but I would ask that you make clear to him at some point that you think it's really helpful that you send those releases out and use that to discourage bad behavior in those whom you regulate.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks.
I thank the senator. I think the message the chairman is trying to send out, there's a new sheriff in town. Senator Heitkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to highlight maybe some of the macro issues that we're confronting, Farmer just a couple minutes ago gave me this. It says U.S. farm income 2013, $124 billion. U.S. farm income 2018, $70 billion. Farm income's been cut in half, driven by low commodity prices, driven by disruption in trade, which I know the chairman's very active on, and we need to continue to be active. But also, I think there's a growing challenge that we have in trying to figure out how we can expand markets. That's why the RIN question keeps coming up. That's why we keep talking about kind of your role in all of this. And the last thing that we can afford is a distorted or unproductive market. for a lot of the commodities that are grown in my state, the work that you do is absolutely critical. And so preventing fraud, preventing manipulation, and seeing market trends is absolutely critical. And so, we can talk about all the other issues, cryptocurrencies, but I think we need to stay razor-like focused on how critical commodity prices are to making a living on the farm. We don't want to, in farm country in my state, we want to grow crops, we want to market those crops, and we want to make a living. And, the ability to access the market is critical, which takes me back to a question Senator Klobuchar asked, which is about the cattle markets. And I want to thank you, Chris, for coming out to North Dakota. We had a great trip where we talked about cattle markets, but we also had an opportunity to talk about oil and oil futures and understand kind of what that shale play is. I took them to an oil rig, so it was all very exciting.
It was.
In North Dakota. Your wife's from South Dakota?
No, my wife's from Long Island, New York. But
Oh, well, that's too bad. Well, you said she would have had fun.
She was a 4-H girl, and she understood a lot better than I did on some of the farm issues. So
Okay, so I just have a couple questions on cryptocurrencies. I know I didn't get a chance in banking to ask you some of these questions, but one of the stories that was recently highlighted in the media is that most of the trading and most of the work that's being done on cryptocurrencies, whether it's Bitcoin or other currencies, is really going under the tax radar. And so the disruption that may happen in other kinds of participation in markets may transition to a cryptocurrency market because it is, the new hot thing. But also, if you think that you can gain 35%, 20%, whatever your effective tax rate is by moving over, that has some destabilizing effects, it seems to me. So can you comment about the tax consequences on cryptocurrency and what you think you and the SEC could be doing to highlight that concern? After all, Al Capone even had to pay taxes. So even if we don't think that this is all legitimate and some of it's nefarious, we need to know what it is.
Senator, thank you for the question. And I know that a lot of people in the crypto community may be watching this hearing, so this is a very good opportunity to remind them that taxes are due on cryptocurrency transactions that may be taxable. And so this is not a off the grid from a tax point of view environment. U.S. law still applies, whether it's a cryptocurrency transaction or anything else.
But typically, tell me what the 1099 consequences are of cryptocurrency transactions.
Well, the IRS treats it, I'm not an expert in this, but it treats it as an asset. And depreciation, the value of an asset means that a tax may be due for that appreciation as a capital gain.
Yeah, but typically how the IRS would know if I made a trade in the equity markets or in your markets is I'd get a 1099 and then there'd be accountability. Tell me whether you think 1099s are being enforced in the cryptocurrency space.
I don't have data to that. My suspicion is not to a great extent.
Well, this is a problem. And it's a problem that's going to continue to grow without some early intervention. And so, again, another whole incentive to move over as people read that and say, hey, if I can get a 20% tax-free gain on, a $10,000 investment, that looks pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So more reason to elevate our concern about this.
Yes.
Because it, in fact, may become a choice that people make to move over.
Indeed. Indeed.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the shout out for 4-H. My girls were all state record book winners, and it is truly an excellent program. I wanted to ask just very quickly or get you to comment on, I know that you've started under your leadership a process of simplifying and modernizing the rules so that they're easier to comply with. Not weakening the rules, but rather a way to make them less burdensome. Can you update us on Project KISS?
I'd be delighted to. And it gives me a chance to clarify any misunderstanding. Project KISS is not about changing policy. It's a policy neutral program, but it's about simplifying and making our laws and our rules and regulations less complex, less costly, less burdensome. And when you think about our desire in the markets to bring more market participants in, you know, when rules are complicated, it's real easy for the big players to hire the lawyers necessary to go through complicated rules. But it's harder for small firms. And the simpler we can make our rules with the same policy implications, then the more accessible our markets are for small and medium-sized firms, which, as we know, are the engines of growth and job creation in this country. So we just this morning announced one of the elements of our Project KISS initiative. Now, our laws were first written in 1937 in a number of cases, and some of our provisions go back to them. And one of the provisions is that all the defined terms are alphabetized. And after you get to Z, you start over again. So you go from Z to AA, and then you go to AA to double Z, then you go to AAA. Well, we've gotten up to quadruple Z in our definition system, and that runs then through the whole body of law that you've got to reference back. And it makes for a tremendous mess when you're trying to read these provisions. So we're getting rid of that alphabetization. We're just putting the defined terms in as they are, but it requires us to go back through the whole rule set to redefine it. This may seem like a lot of nothing, but believe it or not, it simplifies the rule book. And it's just part and parcel of good government. Every so often, rules need to be simplified so they're more accessible to the small and medium-sized companies that might want to come into our marketplace and just find the rule book too daunting. Now, it may mean some less billable hours for some Wall Street law firms or Washington law firms, but you know what? It's good for American business.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's refreshing to hear that we are trying to simplify things. And as you say, that is one of the greatest deterrent to people not participating, just simply not understanding. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Chairman, triple Z?
Quadruple Z.
Quadruple Z. Better go back to triple Z. That sounds like a ranch. It's the Triple Z Ranch or something like that. Well, thank you for trying to clear that up and get rid of that mess. We're waiting on Senator Daines, who is on the way. Let me just ask a real quick question. You noted in your testimony, even as I speak, Senator Daines, you're up if you're ready, and I know you're always ready.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And thanks for testifying in front of the committee. Good to see you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
With the emergence of market volatility last week, I guess it's called the reemergence. It happens time to time. It is times like this that emphasize the CFTC's importance to regulating derivatives that allow businesses like farmers, ranchers, and manufacturers to hedge their risks. These instruments lock in their profits, which could otherwise be eroded by either rising input costs or lower sales. It's important that we do get regulations right, including with your regulatory counterparts in the EU, as well as in emergent technologies. Last September in Columbia Falls, there was a school district that was hacked. It was allowing overseas hackers to issue death threats to children in the Flathead region. And their preferred method of payment was cryptocurrency. It had a chilling effect for many, many families in Montana, and particularly those up in the Flathead region. A few weeks ago, we had a Homeland Security Committee hearing on preventing opioid producers from shipping fentanyl into the country. Committee staff directly interfaced by email with the sellers, learning how they actually operated. And their preferred method of payment? Cryptocurrency. Mr. Chairman, could you share your guiding philosophy for how the CFTC balances license to innovate with the need to guard against the proliferation of illicit activity?
Thank you. Thank you for that, Senator. It's sobering and upsetting, especially we think children involved in what we've been through in the last day. And it's troubling to know, but we do know that a lot of these cryptocurrencies, there is a lot of illicit use. We don't know. I mean, examples like this give us an indication, but we don't know with hard data, percentage-wise, how much of it is used for illicit activities. But we do know it is being used in cases for illicit activity. I met recently with the new head of FinCEN, the financial crimes unit, and they assured me that their anti-money laundering procedures are in place for all domestic virtual currency trading platforms, which we don't regulate at the CFTC, but we're concerned about these issues. And we're broadly concerned about the use of these virtual currencies for activities like this. And yet no federal regulator has direct authority on that. And that's something I think as policy makers in Congress, but also us and the regulatory agencies, need to put probably first and foremost in our list of what's the next steps and where do we go next. And I think the industry itself has something to do in this area as well. I know that in the UK now, a number of virtual currency platforms are banding together to develop a self-regulatory organization to clean up the industry of this. And I think that is something that they haven't been called out on, and to the extent that people that are advocates for virtual currencies are listening, I think they need to know that they've got a responsibility in cleaning up this industry if they really want it to be something that bears the respect and becomes part of not only our future, but their future as well.
I want to shift gears and talk about blockchain. Both of the chairmen, my chairman to my right, my chairman to the left here, were in Montana for our Ag Summit, which I thank both of you for coming. And Giancarlo, thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. You spoke about Project KISS.
Yep.
Keeping it simple, stupid, which is in keeping with President Trump's broader regulatory agenda to eliminate outdated and unnecessary regulations. And we know that reporting requirements on registered market participants poses great overhead costs. I saw that firsthand when I was in the private sector. Could you share some of your efforts through Lab CFTC to pioneer blockchain technology?
Sure. So before you joined us, Senator, I was talking a little bit about Project KISS, and I was saying that one of its goals is to simplify our rules so that small and medium-sized companies can enter. And I gave an example of something we announced this morning. I'd like to give another example. One of the things that an agency like ours does is use no action relief to make adjustments in the rules. And that body of no action relief appears in letters, but in no formal way that someone new to the market can come in and understand really the way our rules work. So another element of Project KISS is to embody all of that hundreds of no action letters into actual rulemaking. So again, our rules are easier to understand for new players coming to the market. Lab CFTC is our focal point for how do we interact and how do we learn about all these new innovations. FinTech is probably the most creative area of technology innovation right now. It's transforming financial markets. And we needed to find a way that we can bring in talented people that understand these technologies and open up a window. And so with our Lab CFTC, we've held office hours in New York, Chicago, and recently in Silicon Valley, because you can't sit in Washington and say, innovators come to us. You've got to go to them, onto their turf, and understand what they're doing and have them do demos. And so that's what we're doing with Lab CFTC.
I'm out of time, but Chairman Giancarlo, I want to thank you. Your last comment, in fact, you're getting out of this ivory tower of Washington, D.C. out to where the action is actually occurring. There's a lot of inaction in this town, and you're out there where the people are. You mentioned New York, you mentioned Chicago, you mentioned Silicon Valley. You also came to Great Falls, Montana for our Ag Summit, and I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Daines, thank you very much for some very pertinent questions. That will conclude our hearing today. To the chairman, thank you for sharing your views on these important topics. You've given this committee much to think about as we continue to look forward to the CFTC reauthorization and that challenge. To my fellow members, we would ask that any additional questions you may have for the record be submitted to the committee clerk 5 business days from today or by 5 p.m. next Friday, February the 23rd. The committee is adjourned.